Hello, and welcome to SpeechGoods, a show where we talk about business, money, mindset, private practice, all within the realm of the speech and language pathology field. I am your host, financial enthusiast, and fellow speech language pathologist, Danny Augustine. In today's interview, you're going to get to hear from an amazing woman, Ayelet Marinovich, MACCC-SLP. Ayelet is a pediatric speech language pathologist, parent educator, singer, and imperfect mother based in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's the founder and host of Learn with Less, where she provides families with the confidence to raise a great human from day one without having to buy a single toy. She's the creator of the Learn with Less infant and toddler curriculum, the basis for which is outlined in her best-selling books, Understanding Your Baby and Understanding Your Toddler. Yes, like this lady just does all the things. She's amazing. She served thousands of families through her online and in-person programs using her Learn with Less curriculum. She's trained licensed facilitators to serve countless more families all over the world. Her current passions include spending time with her family, dismantling the baby industry. Oh man, I just love that, right? And creating communities of support for families of young children with infants and toddlers of all developmental levels. So in this interview today, you're going to get to hear like the whole realm and gambit of all of the things. We talk about how she went from being a theater major to a speech language pathologist. She talks about the idea of repotting yourself, which I just love. Like we're all little plants. I just love it. It's fabulous. She talks about how she used her one idea to spark her business and learning how to scale her business beyond herself. I know this is a topic that happens a lot within the speech language pathology field. For those of you who maybe want to start an SLP business, and it may not necessarily be a private practice, a big part of being successful with that is being able to scale your business so that you're not always having to be working in it all the time. So she gives some really amazing tips for that in this episode. Okay, let's get to the interview. You're gonna love Ayelet. Hello, Ayelet. How are you doing today?
I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, so exciting. So excited to have you here. We just heard your wonderful bio. You're doing something super cool and super different in SLP, in the SLP space, and still like heavily utilizing your SLP skills and literally what we were trained to do. You're just doing it in your own way. So I'm super excited to have you on and share a little bit about your journey and just how you kind of went down this path that like you very much made your own, which I like I'm like putting my hands up for that. So Ayelet, tell us a little bit about what makes you and your SLP journey unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it really is about when I came into this as I don't know if I would say a second career. It was like the first actual career. But the second, like in my like mid to late 20s is when I went back to grad school. I did a undergrad in theater and Russian literature. So that tells you a little bit about me and my own, like my where I stand in my own social identities, the privileges I've had, all of those things, right? And I spent my early 20s living in New York and figuring out what I wanted to do and pursuing potentially a career in the performing arts and all of that. And then realizing after several years of holding down 17 jobs at a time to pay exorbitant rent at that time, what was exorbitant rent of New York, which is at this point, like, pennies. I was like, oh no, I need to do something that is actually much more impactful and not about me, actually. And so I mean, to begin with, like I started looking into fields that were human service oriented, and I considered social work, I considered early childhood education, I considered lots of different things. And it's so funny because I was working at a school as like an administrative assistant trying to figure stuff out. And the reading specialist was like, oh, you should with your background and your interest in like storytelling and narratives and blah, 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 like you should look into language therapy. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a great
What's
idea.
that?
And I was like, and then because this is how my mind works, I like take an idea and then I'm like, oh, I need to find out everything there is to know about that. So I started like Googling speech and language pathology and then talking to everybody's aunts who were a speech language pathologist and like realizing that when I was like in elementary school, I actually did this like interesting volunteer project that I didn't even remember until I unearthed it later and was like with all these kids who used AAC and like it's like, oh yeah, like all of that is speech pathology. And like it was the field that brought it all together for me. I had so many interests in things like child development, psychology, like I said, like just storytelling in general and like being with other humans. I'm like a very community oriented person. And when I found the field of speech pathology, I was like, oh, this is fascinating. Like this brings it all together. And I love the idea that I can work with this population now. I can work with this population later. I can work in a hospital. I can work in the educational sector. I can be a private practice. I can do all of those things. My grandfather, when I was growing up, had this phrase that he used, which was like, he believed in repotting yourself, which I just love that as a philosophy of what you can do in life, right? Like, just because what's the point of being stagnant, right? And so I love the idea that in this field, there were so many directions that I could go. And that I could potentially repot myself within a single field even over time, and I wouldn't get stagnant. And so that's my journey into speech language pathology. And I guess, I don't know that makes me unique, but that's the unique journey that I was on.
Yeah, I love the idea of repotting yourself. I was like jotting that down in my little Google Doc that I keep while people are talking to me. And I love that idea, repotting yourself and just sort of like, and that it's okay. And sometimes you might need to repot yourself because maybe the pot you're in right now is too small, or it's just not the right shape for you, or maybe it used to be the right shape, but now it's not, and that's okay.
Exactly.
So I love that. So tell us about how you went from like theater person to speech pathologist. And how did you go from like, can you tell us about your journey towards starting your own business?
Yeah. I mean, that basically came out of having a baby.
They do things like that.
They do those things. They make you reassess all the things in your brain. And my own experience was that my partner and I had we'd gotten married. I'd gotten pregnant, and then he got a job in London, and so we moved to London. And I, applied for the like health council, blah, blah, blah thing to get my my license, my American license transferred over to the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. And
Royal College?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. That is their version of ASHA. It sounds very fancy.
That sounds way better than ASHA. The Royal. I want to be a Royal SLP. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, we can continue like this all night long. Anyway, so that took until I was literally 38 weeks pregnant, and then I was licensed in the UK, and I was like, oh, okay, great, okay. So I spent the bulk of my first pregnancy, living in London, figuring out what that would look like. What would it look like to be, what was the system that was in place there for pregnant people, birthing people, new parents, what supports were in place for me, what could I access? And that was amazing. And, actually quite different from what it is in the US. And I started just, befriending other pregnant people and birthing people. And it was great. It was a nice way to, just create community, form a community. When I didn't know anybody, I was so far from, any support system that I had. I didn't have any of my, whole drawer full of SLP stuff, and then I had a baby. And I was thinking, well, I had this idea while I was still pregnant that I wanted to bring together other new parents and caregivers and create a community of support for myself, and also be able to share the kinds of information that I already knew, right? Because when I had my child, I struggled with many of the things, all of the things that new parents tend to struggle with, right? All of those things about prioritizing your own needs and sleep deprivation and vulnerability about every single thing, and feeling like that lack of confidence and just being so overwhelmed and anxious and exhausted, clinically and not clinically. But it was overwhelming. And I also knew that I had some knowledge that many of my fellow new parents around me were asking about, like, what the heck should I be doing with this tiny human? How, like, and that, like, I don't know, what am I supposed to be doing with it? Do I have what I need? And all of those feelings of, am I enough? Right? I knew that what I had, and joint attention and eye gaze and holding my child and being there for my child and talking to my baby was enough. Just because of my own experiences, my own knowledge base, having worked with many new parents in the past, I did not question that part. And so I started thinking, well, it would be great to be able to support each other, right? Because we all come with our own knowledge base as we come into new parenthood, and we were all from all over the world as well, right? Like, we were in this metropolitan area. So I started inviting other new parents and caregivers over to my home in the beginning, and just hosting these sort of caregiver and baby style classes. And that was how it all began. So it began as a grand experiment, and just really a need for my own self, that I needed, right, out of necessity for my own personal emotional needs and professional brain, right? I could see that there was information that I could share that was useful. And then it was just about experimenting with form, and starting to listen to what the questions were that people were asking, and sharing what was relevant for all of us in those journeys. And I found that it was super relevant and very helpful, both for myself as a facilitator of that kind of group, and also for all of the different caregivers that were coming. And over the next few years, it grew. I started renting a space. I was leading multiple classes each week with my child, which was really fun. And it became just sort of a bigger thing. And then my husband and I left London, and I knew that I wanted to continue doing it. And so at that point, I thought, well, what would work? How could that look? And I wanted it to be bigger. I had this, totally big pie in the sky idea of, I could start an empire. It would be so fun, like having babies and parents and blah, blah, blah. And then over time, that's kind of what I did.
So what was that time frame? Can you tell us? So, like, from you getting the idea, because I know you said you kind of got the idea whenever you were pregnant with your first child.
Yeah.
Like, up until you leaving London, like, it sounds like in that time, like, you were doing more like physical in-person classes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was that time frame? Like, was that just over like a couple years, or was it over?
That was longer? Over, yeah, 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
As when we left London, my son was just turning 2. And then we moved to Berlin for a year. to Berlin, Germany. And at that point I was like, okay, well, I don't want, like, logistically and financially, I'm not ready to monetize this, because I was living outside of the UK. I mean, outside of the US. I didn't want to have to pay taxes in 3 different countries. That did not sound fun. So I was like, well, let me see what happens. I'm going to experiment with form, right? So I had gone from these live, very local, very hyper local caregiver and me style classes. And then I was like, well, what would happen if I started a podcast, right? So I started that podcast about 2 years into doing this, in February of 2016. And that became a thing. I started, figuring out what were the things that people wanted to know, what had been the things that people definitely were asking about all the time. What was my expertise that I could share, the knowledge base that I had, that I could really share with people in ways that was like simple, accessible, easy, playful, fun, that people could just, grab a soundbite and listen to and be like, oh, I really learned something from this. And there's this voice coming from the internet ether that like can help me and knows what I'm going through. And that's what I started hearing back from people right after those first few months of like, why isn't anyone downloading my podcast? Because I didn't know anything about starting a podcast or an online business or anything like that, right?
You just went for it.
I just went for it. I literally Googled how to start a podcast and then did the thing, recorded it, and then released it and was like, just waiting for the listeners. Yes. How many downloads do I have today?
Right. The thousands of people who will
only
listen
2? What? Oh, Mom, you already listened to that? Oh, okay.
That's the worst when you see like a couple downloads and it's like you told 3 friends about it and that's how many downloads you have and you're like, well. Yeah. But did that discourage you at all? Just curious, like how long did it take for the podcast to sort of get going?
I kept at it and then I started looking, then I started researching, how to build an audience. How to build a following. Oh yeah, I should probably figure that out,
So like it wasn't super, just like to clarify for the listener. So you started a podcast, it wasn't like it wasn't going super well. So then you just were like, okay, I guess I just need to research more. Like
I guess there's more information I need to know. Yeah, exactly. What's the next question I need to ask? Right?
Yes, that's so, and I just want to highlight that for everybody. Like, of course, like Ayelet is just like, oh yeah, like it just didn't work, and I just kept going. But I know that a lot of us as SLPs and our personality types, like we don't like to fail, we don't like to disappoint anyone, we don't like to not do it right. And I think I just want to highlight that for everyone listening, that like that you kept at it. And this idea, especially like any form of entrepreneurship, whether you're trying to build a language baby helping empire, or you just want to start like an Etsy store and sell coffee mugs, like either way, you can't just see failure and then stop. Whenever you're starting something, an entrepreneurship or building something, like it's not a failure. It just means that you need to, like you said, like you need to get more information, you need to ask more questions, or you need to change your approach. And I think people see people like you, who you've built this cool thing and you like, oh, I'm self-employed, I make my own schedule. Like, I think people see like all the cute Instagram posts and are like, oh, I want to do that. But they don't see that stuff beforehand where it's like, no, like I fell on my face quite a few times.
A lot.
Like,
yeah.
I just dusted myself off and said, all right, boo-boo, let's keep going.
That's it. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I mean, and it is also about figuring out what are the things out there that, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. I knew I was not the first podcaster out there. I knew that I was not the first person with a blog and a website. So I started looking into like, where can I find resources? Where can I find help? Where can I find community? And what did I do? I don't know. I just started sharing the heck out of what I was doing, sharing it in groups, sharing it in, blogging groups, sharing it in all kinds of places, and just asking my friends and family to share what I was doing if they found it helpful. I would also share it with other colleagues, like, hey, I have these episodes about, what does it mean to like use the, a communication temptation? What is it like? What happens when, like, why is it important to use music? Like, why is that beneficial to language? Like the questions that like I had asked and my friends had asked as new parents, listening to those people and what those questions were, and then coming up with content around those questions, right? Or those challenges. Like that's it, right? So creating the content that people want and need answers to, and then, finding my own voice. And that comes over time, but I felt like I could share who I was authentically because I had already been doing that publicly. And because I do have a background in storytelling and narrative building and acting and all of those things. And I felt like that part of me was not hard to find. But I know that many people do. And many people struggle with like, well, there's already people talking about that same thing. Why am I going to create something, why do people want to hear it from me? Well, we can get into that, of course, as well. But like, you're your own person. And I knew that I had a story to tell, and that could get told in only, in a new form or with new examples around it. Or, my early podcast episodes, for instance, are very much mimicking in certain ways elements of my classes, right? I would use those kinds of elements of play and talk and sing and move that are essential to the Learn with Less curriculum, and share with my audience, however small it was, those elements. And over time, I discovered what that was and how to talk about it in a way that people really resonated with.
And a part of that, I feel like it sounds like that's exactly what you were doing. It's kind of experimenting. Like, first of all, like
Absolutely.
asking your audience, what do you want to hear? What do you want to see? Because a lot of times people want to tell you, people like to share their opinion. Have you noticed that?
People love telling their own stories. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. People love,
as a fellow podcaster, I have noticed that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I think like asking your audience, especially with this idea, like once you figured out that you needed to build an audience, I think that's super, super smart. So Ayelet, take us back. So you started this podcast. It flopped a little bit in the beginning, and then you were like, sure, let's try this again. You started sharing the poop out of your content. And when was this? Like, was this like what? Like 2016, 2017 that you did the podcast?
2016. Yeah. Early 2016 was when I started it. Within the first few months, I started realizing that my numbers were pretty small and that I needed to have a plan of some kind.
Okay. Okay.
And so then I started, using the Google machine to figure out what that could look like. So, and then I would say by, June, that summer, 6, 7 months later, I had something going. It was being shared by other SLPs. It was being shared by parents and parent groups. Things were starting to move, right? And I think when I realized that I had people in my audience who were both new parents, parents of babies, parents of toddlers, and also many professionals working with families with infants and toddlers, feeling, number one, who were sharing it potentially with their clients as another resource, and also using it for themselves if they were like an SLP with a new baby. Like, those were the people I heard from the most. The people who were like, this is gold. This content is really important to me, and it's really helping me validate and know what I already know, but it's so helpful to hear somebody else saying it, right? And it's so interesting, right? Because we know this as humans, right? You can hear the same message again and again, But when you read it in a textbook, it hits you one way. When you hear it in a podcast, it hits you another way. When you see a quote on social media, it hits you another way. When you read a blog post about it, it hits you another way. And all of those are different voices and different people telling different stories about that same information. And you resonate with it in different times and different ways and at a different moment, right? Because you can ingest it differently depending on the moment.
Right. I mean, I know for myself, like I either have to learn the same lesson over and over again. And I also think different seasons of life, you know,
Yes.
your information about interacting, like, you know, objectively, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand how you should interact with a baby or an infant,
Right.
but I'm sure like, you know, when that day comes that I have one, I'm probably gonna be like, wait, hold on, where's Ayelet's podcast? I need this for a second. So you were originally doing Learn with Less, and was it always Learn with Less? Is that kind of what you always branded
it wasn't
as?
I had not come up with those words specifically until I would say late 2018, early 2019. In the beginning, it was called Strength in Words, which is still what my company is called, what my private practice is called, Strength in Words, right? Which for me was great. It was like a play on, I'm from the Bay Area, so the Warriors, whoop whoop. So, you know, their whole thing is strength in numbers, is their, like, you know, that's their logo and their thing. But as a speech pathologist, I was thinking, you know, this is obviously there is a lot of strength in the words that we use and in communication. And I felt like it was like an homage to that and all of those things. But over time, as I continued to develop a specific, you know, philosophy and brand, it didn't quite say in that like soundbite way, like what I did and what my brand stood for and what I was doing in the world. And so I just sort of, over time, what was impactful to other people about what I was sharing became much more clear to me, which happens, right, in business. As you go along, you realize what is the thing that's actually resonating for people? What is the thing at the core of what you stand for and what your values are and what you're doing and what you're sharing and what makes you different and what makes you interesting. And that was really what it came down to, is that, you know, I could say like, oh yeah, well, you know, I share like really nice, you know, developmental ideas and information for parents with infants and toddlers, and like, that's fun. And then I also like, I show them how to do it really simply and with like, you know, like everyday items and everyday routines and blah, 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 right? Like, that's like a lot of words.
Yeah.
Nobody's there for that, right?
No.
Like, nobody wants to hear that. So, I honestly, I'm trying to remember how it even came out of me, but it was like, bleh. It happened one day and I was like, I just tell people like learn with less. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's
catchy.
exactly what I do. And the alliteration and the blah, you know, I was like, oh my God, that's it, you know. So that was, and then when that happened, I realized that was what brought it all together, you know, and then I rebranded. The podcast was, if you search for the Strength in Words podcast, it will come up because, you know, the podcast was rebranded as Learn with Less. But if you listen to all of my early, you know, probably the first 45 or 50 episodes, it's, you know, welcome to Strength in Words. And you're like, wait, what? But, you know, that's another lesson. I feel like, you know, it's so important. Like yes, of course, start as you mean to go on, but also nothing is set in stone. Like, you can continue to experiment and find playfulness in what you're doing throughout. And there are no rules. You are the rule maker, right, of your own business. I'm like, that's so important.
Yeah.
And scary. It's also scary. Yeah.
Well, and I think, so to everyone out there who's like, and I hear this a lot, especially with SLPs wanting to start their private practice. because on this podcast, I talk about private practice a good bit, and I have a lot of private practitioners on. They're like, it's the name, like figuring out a name for the private practice is always like the like,
it
oh my gosh, I don't know what
many
to do.
people.
Yes.
It stops so many people in their tracks.
Yes.
Just call it your own name. It doesn't matter.
You just got to do it. So if any of you out there are like struggling with a name for something or whatever it is, listen to Ayelet.
Yeah, because speech and language with Janice. It doesn't matter, right?
Right. And you can change it and you can adapt. Like, I think there's that weird balance. Teresa, every time, okay, so Teresa Richards, when I interviewed her on this podcast, I used the word balance. And I think it was the first time anyone ever cursed on my podcast. And she said basically like balance is BS, but she said the full word. Yeah. So now every time I say it's a balance, I think of Teresa Richards telling me like, Danny, no, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sorry, Teresa. It's that weird balance between like, yes, you need to begin with the end in mind, like, some Stephen Covey stuff. Like, we want to begin with the end in mind. We don't just want to be like, blah, blah. Like, you do want to have like some sort of plan, but also recognize that like, it's a very fluid thing, a business or an idea. It's not this like set in stone thing that's going to stay that way. And a lot of times it's fluid. Yeah. You have to be fluid in order even to stay relevant, honestly. I mean, I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, if I hear the word pivot one more time, aside from that amazingly hilarious episode of Friends when they were moving to the couch, I think that's just such a great thing for all of us to understand. Because I know there's a lot of SLPs out there, or even if you're an OT or PT, whoever you are, who are probably thinking about starting a side hustle or starting a business or whatever it is. And just recognize, I mean, if you started your podcast in 2016, I mean, it's 2021, like this is 5 years in the like, this is 5 years. Like you were what, like 2 or 3 years in when you decided to change your name? Yeah. Yeah. And like, you just did it, right? Like, yeah, you just do it. Just change the labels. It's fine.
It was time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just make it happen.
So your original audience was caregivers, parents, but now, and I know that's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of like what Strength in Words was really geared towards, even Learn with Less. But when did you start morphing Learn with Less, not only into like you serving parents, but you serving speech language pathologists as well, because you provide, and give us a little bit of detail on that. Yeah. For the listeners who may or may not be familiar with your, with your brand, certifying and training other SLPs. Yes. So, I had released 2 best-selling books in 2018 and 2019. And and once that had all gone down, and once that was sort of all in the world, I sort of looked up and realized like, oh, I get it. Like, I get what's going on here. Like, because all that time I had been segmenting my audience. I knew who I had in my audience. I knew that I had pretty much a third were families with infants, a third were families of toddlers, a few in between who had multiple young children, and then also at least a third who were professionals working with infants and toddlers. So whether they were speech language pathologists, early childhood educators, occupational therapists, physical therapists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, all those amazing professionals who support both infants and toddlers and the grown-ups who care for them. I knew that there were many people like that. And so I was always trying to figure out like, how can I serve them? Because I had these books, I had some parenting programs, right? I had these classes that I was leading both in person and online. But I knew that there was a bigger role for my professionals to play. And once I released that second book, I could see it finally. I could see like, this is way bigger than me. What was the second book?
Like, so the first book was Understanding Your Baby, and the second book was Understanding Your Toddler. So together they are development and activity guides for playing with your baby and toddler from birth to 3 years.
Okay.
And they really they are the sort of DIY version for families, without the community support piece, without the let's be together, figure it out together piece. They're the information that came out of the classes. So, and I knew I had lots of parents and caregivers and also professionals having them in their libraries, sharing them with families, all those things. I even have, professors, like one of my former professors at my speech pathology program was it was on her syllabus, right? Like all of her students were reading these books because it was part of her intro to language development class, right? So I knew that there were a lot of things going on, but finally once the 2 books were out, I could see the full picture and I could say it out loud finally, right? Because it takes time to grow and to be able to say out loud those big scary dreams that you have for yourself. And I realized that that is what I wanted to build. I did want to build the ability for, in those early years when I was living in London, I was like, I want to make this bigger. I don't want this to just be me sitting in a room with families. That's amazing. And I love it. And I never want to stop doing it. And also, this is resonating with families from all over the world, from all different walks of life, with people who have, access to familial support and have none, from people who quote unquote have all of the things and quote unquote have nothing, right? It's beyond a parenting philosophy. It's just about understanding how can you use what you already have? How can you use the bandwidth that you already have? How can you see what's available to you? And it doesn't have to go within or outside of any specific culture or parenting philosophy, right? We can do this and also be culturally responsive to whatever your family is doing, whatever the language or languages that you speak and you're, exposing your child to are, that, that's always been the case. So, and I also knew that I'm not the right person to serve every community and every child and every family. And so how can I create the opportunity to make a exponential impact with what I know is resonating and what I know is evidence-based, because it's literally based on developmental research, and what I know resonates with families all over the world. So I started it was January of 2020.
Oh, you gotta talk about that.
Oh,
when did you
will.
Start in 2020, in January 2020?
Our licensing and certification program.
Okay, talk about that.
I had a wonderful initial group of 7 speech language pathologists, early childhood educators, lots of different kinds of people. And they were taking this course that I was, I had created and was creating alongside them and making sure that I was answering all their questions and creating everything that they needed. And then the pandemic hit 2 months in. 2 months in. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to teach you how to do online classes, which luckily I've been doing since 2017. So it's not a problem.
So you were mentoring. So that's how you, yes. I'm going to be Ross pivot. Yep. That little Ross and Rachel from Friends. So you were originally in January of 2020, when you started the mentorship with other professionals, mm-hmm. You were doing more how do you do therapy?
No, it was so sorry, let me be clear. So basically what I had created this entire curriculum of lesson plans, caregiver handouts, the Learn with Less infant and toddler curriculum, which was, you know, a lesson plan for how to share information about either cognitive development, communication development, motor sensory development, social and emotional development. There's a set of curriculum for infants and a set of curriculum for toddlers. So all kinds of resources that a person who's a speech language pathologist, an OT, a PT, an MSW, whatever, could grab hold of, go through a whole, you know, course of information that is like all of those things that you need to know, like what is the Learn with Less philosophy? How do I, you know, get families to engage in a class, for instance, of like a caregiver and child class? How do I, you know, feel like burst through imposter syndrome and like learn to facilitate and be the facilitator of a group of parents, even if I'm not a parent, for instance? How do I make sure that I am serving families responsibly and with an understanding about my own social identities and with like an understanding about cultural and every like inclusive contexts, right? How do I market myself? How do I figure out all the logistics, right? So all of those pieces, those 6 modules are the Learn with Less facilitator training program. And they then, once they go through that program, and it, you know, should that be something that you want to do, you go through that program, then you lead a demo class that's either an infant class or a toddler class for caregivers and babies or caregivers and toddlers in your community or online. And then you become certified. And we provide ongoing support, coaching, a whole professional community around all of that, around utilizing the curriculum and making sure that you're, you know, doing it in accordance with the guidelines, and also providing support around how to do that and how to be successful with it. Should you be, for instance, just like on maternity leave, for instance, or a person who is just starting their own private practice, or who has their entire private practice going and wants to add in this other dimension of it. So that is what the program that I offer does. So we have a license, we license those materials, so you have this plug and play curriculum to utilize, and then also you're certified to continue to do that within our structure. And
that is cool. So you're essentially you're basically, someone can start a whole like other income stream with whatever using this. And it sounds like you even give like marketing and business support to people who have been trained. Yes. That is cool. That's kind of like empowering, like it's like empowering SLPs to go do their own thing. Cause like, is that how it works? Like, are they, obviously it's like within the curriculum and whatnot, but like they can go and teach classes and they can like do it and blah, blah, blah. Yep, exactly. So we have some people who started while they had a full-time job or have a full-time job, you know, at a practice or at a school or whatever, who always wanted to, who love early intervention and love doing this kind of stuff and want to do it on the side. People who were curious about private practice, but didn't really know whether they had the tools, but this really looked like a really fun way to get out of their 9-to-5 and start something of their own. Many people have come into it and said, like, even if I never even led a Learn with Less class, like I have so many tools now to be able to offer everything, like anything that I wanted to create. Now I know what to do, how to do that. And so we create this, you know, this community of support and a whole infrastructure around, you know, helping SLPs, OTs, all the people
to create what they've to lead those big scary dreams and lead that and not have to reinvent the wheel, not have to do the 5 years of developing a curriculum, of figuring all of the things out on their own like I've done. And now having this really robust and very giving, very kind, generous community of other professionals who are all speaking the same language, all creating stuff, and all really have the same philosophy of like routines-based intervention, parent coaching, serving families with less, right? Using less with and you know, some of the, it's so interesting, Danny, because some of the other like kinds of things that people have reported are like, I have totally cut down on my own stuff that I bring to therapy, right? Like, because of like the learn with less philosophy of like just utilizing what a family already has. This has helped me to, you know, really, it's changed my whole approach to therapy and allowed me to be more of that parent coaching facilitator that I've always wanted to be able to be within the context of my therapy practice. And that's cool. That's really cool.
That's awesome. So it's like the goal isn't necessarily to teach, if you're not teaching a therapy approach specifically,
right. No.
You're teaching them how to be facilitators for this curriculum, but through that they learn principles and like learn, I mean, through being a facilitator, that I swear I need speech therapy, Ayelet. I do.
You don't, you're just fine.
I do. Okay. But through being a facilitator, learning like, I mean, but that's part of being the facilitator. Like you're learning how to interact with the parents and explain things in a parent friendly way, which I think can sometimes be can sometimes be difficult for us, especially like when you're going into someone's home, which that is most of early intervention. I mean, that's what the evidence says works, is like parent coaching in a community setting, like out in their environment. So you've built this thing, and it sounds like the pandemic you kind of had to pivot a little bit, but the pandemic, what's great about your business model is that it can be offered in person and it can be offered online.
That's right. And parents and caregivers have been craving interaction, right? Nope. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old myself. It's been a rough couple of years. And I mean, for all of the families who've had babies during a pandemic, like this has been a very difficult time. And early parenthood is isolating in general, but now, you know, the beauty of it is that what we have to create and what we can all offer as SLPs, because this is not just the Learn with Less show, right? This is about like all of what we can all do to create and promote understanding through what we already have, right? Is that you can utilize and you can share with families what they can use that they already have, what they can offer, and then bring them together. I mean, that's the core piece of what we do, is we create community. And that is huge, right? Because whether or not you have a child who is is developing along a quote unquote typical trajectory, or whether they are experiencing delays or, you know, totally different kinds of, you know, difficult issues within the first few months and years of their lives, we all need support, and we all need someone to help us understand what we can do, and the parents and caregivers themselves need that support. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of utilizing what you already know, and applying it in a more holistic way outside of the therapy context and outside of all of the red tape that tends to happen and all of the systems that we know are in place that don't really work for a lot of people. And, you know, we also, of course, teach how to like do things like partnering with other local organizations so that you can serve all kinds of, you know, parts of your own community, and ensuring that you are the right person to serve that part of the community, for instance. So.
Well, I like this, that it's another way. And I always love having individuals on who can kind of show like, because I think a lot of people that I get DMs from, people that may be in this audience, there's this, just like you mentioned, like there's this frustration with like the red tape or frustration with the system.
Yes.
And like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I guess like I'm in it, so I gotta just learn how to work with it. But there's actually a lot of creative ways for you to use your SLP skills to help family, like to do the things that you want to do the things that like get you, you know, up and going in the morning that aren't necessarily like in that traditional way. And then also ways that you can do that and create and make a good living for yourself. It's not like you have to be this like, I mean, I'm over the martyrdom thing. Like I'm not trying to, you know, like do that. So tell us a little bit. I mean, you've been doing this for a few years now. You know, can you talk a little bit about like your knowledge, your time, your energy? Because I mean, you have 2 kids, and I mean, pretty small kids. I mean, you know, 7's a little bit older, but I mean, that's like, to me, that's like he just became not a small kid, honestly.
Right. I know.
Like how, and then just like understanding your like where your time goes, and even just, I mean, like even managing like income streams. I know that you have private clients that you see. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, my work week, I manage most of my work is in the mornings. So we have a babysitter who comes in 8 a.m. to 12 Monday through Friday. And that is when I get everything done, pretty much. So I have always had a short and sweet and packed couple of hours. And that is when I see clients. I meet with my Learn with Less clients. That's when I often will do classes. When I do all of the, you know, batching of content and content creation and podcast production and all of that good stuff. It all happens in, what is that, 4 hours?
Yeah, I think it's 4 hours. That's in packed
20 hours a week is what happens. And that it does and end up seeping out, right? And that, you know, there are little things that happen outside of those moments, but I have done my best to automate a lot of things so that I don't have to think about as much on those off hours when I'm not sitting in front of my computer. I can just be present with my family.
What are some of the things, if you don't mind telling us, like, what are some things that you've automated that you found has really helped like save you time and energy in your business?
Yeah. Email, obviously is a huge thing. So just getting people into what I do and getting people familiar with what I have and what I have to offer. So whether it's you know, sharing with people some kind of free training or helpful document, and then sending them a series of, you know, information that is pertinent to what they've learned within that information, that can be automated. Obviously, all of the, what else? I mean, I definitely batch content. And I do a lot of copying and pasting of things when I am like reaching out to people to come onto my podcast or, you know, those kinds of things. But I will also say that a lot of it is super high touch too, because that's the kind of brand that I have. You know, it's a really interesting mix of automated information and systems and processes, as well as like you are talking to me, like we are having a conversation in the DMs, like that is happening right now. And also like the way I serve my clients is I am, you know, very consistently in our group and in our community and answering questions and stuff like that. But, you know, making sure that another thing is like having people pre-submit questions that I can answer in a batch on a call, right? So that it's not just a constant barrage, but it's we all get together in community and we talk about this and we do it together and we share information about what's working for us and what's not working for us and what this person has done. And oh my gosh, have you seen in our group, like what that person shared recently? Like it's, so those kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, I think really just systematizing things, which I'm not naturally good at. Like I have had to learn how to do that, as opposed to many of those in our field who are that type A binders, color coded things. That's not me.
No.
And I'm always like, oh, that would be really cool. I wish I could do that.
Yeah. Or
but
stick
it's not,
to it.
and that's okay. Right. Yeah. Like, yeah. So a lot of it is like reaching out and figuring, again, like educating myself about like how to create a system that works for me. And finding the, different like project management software that's built for my brain, right? Like I would love to use things like Asana or stuff like that, but like, which is like a project management tool, but I never felt like I could get my head around it. So I use something called Notion, for instance, which is an amazing workspace that I can create everything I want. And then later I can connect it to where it needs to go, right? So stuff like that is just like, you have to just figure out what works for you. And it's a lot of experimenting with different kinds of systems that might work for you, and then systematizing and processizing, like, and productizing some kind of thing that you offer, right?
Right.
So,
well, and I also want to highlight like that and I think this is something that, and I've felt myself falling into this trap, like, and I'm still learning as well, because I'm only about a year and a half in. But this idea that like you've built your business around your life, you haven't built your life around your business. Like I just want to highlight, like she just said that you work. I know you will work outside of 8 to 12. I'm not saying never do, but like the fact that this is when the babysitter comes. This is when, this is my time. All my full attention is going to be on my business, my work, blah, blah, blah. And then when this is over, unless there's like some stuff going on, then, that is my time to spend with my kids. That is the time to spend with my family. And I think that's what a lot of people want. But I think it's really easy when you start any business, whether it's a private practice or an online business or whatever it is. Like if you start, you start selling peanuts at your garage, whatever. It's really easy to fall into this trap of like work, because there's always something to do. There's always an Instagram post you can make. There's always something.
Little fingers.
But like, how did you keep that? Okay, for you guys that are not on video, one of her kiddos is maybe in the background.
Okay.
I love it.
So good.
Speaking of like important family, how did you do that? Like, how did you keep so focused and not like work it? Because I'm the type of person, I can work myself to death. I have to consciously tell myself, like, you need to relax. Like, you need to just like turn off, like stop trying to come up with new ideas, stop creating content. Stop. Like, how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it literally was out of necessity. Like I did not have, I started this business when my oldest was born and then started an online business when I was pregnant with my second. So this has all happened around my kids and around my family. So that's just how it's always been. So I don't really feel like I had a choice, in the matter. But I do think, I certainly had to figure out what worked best for me as far as when were my best working hours, right? Like for a while in the very beginning, when my youngest was in his first year of life, I feel like I just took whatever I could get as far as childcare. Sometimes it was a grandparent. Sometimes it was like we had for a few months, we had a fantastic babysitter who was able to give me like a full day, 2 days a week. And that actually ended up not being great for me. Like that, I couldn't work that way. That was, I needed a short amount of time on different days, because I knew that my brain would come up with different things and I could attend to different things on different days. And if I didn't have a little bit of every day, I would feel more like what you said, like, oh God, I can't turn it off. So me having a little bit, and it's not, I mean, to me, it feels like at this point, it's like, I just have it down to a science. I know exactly what I'm doing in all of those hours. Right. And if I didn't have a portion of each day, it would be much harder for me to do that. And I also recognize and acknowledge that that's a privilege in and of itself. That is a luxury that I was able to do that and have that and create this around that. And I just want to name that out loud. Right. And I also it's taken a long time for me, because so much of it was wanting to create something that I was creating something that was value-based and that was, going to speak to what I wanted to create and the philosophy that I wanted to give to create in the world. And I was never going to be a person that was gonna have sponsorships from my podcast from a toy subscription company. That wouldn't work. Because that's not what my brand stands for. And I will tell you, I have been approached by those people and I'm like, yeah, do you know what I do? No, it doesn't work. So, so I have very intentionally created a brand around my values and around, what I wanted it to stand for. Otherwise it wouldn't have been worth my time for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just think that's awesome. And just I feel like, did you always have a really good, solid understanding that your time was super valuable? Or is that something you had to learn?
I think I did, partially because, academically in college, I really had to manage my time well. I was very into, different, I always did a lot of hard academic stuff, and also heavy duty extracurricular theaters, right? So which was a lot of time management and figuring out when my brain was going to work well and when I could do the work that I needed to do. And sometimes it was leaving it off until the end when I had 5 hours and that was it. But just as far as all through my own life and career, I've definitely had to balance and figure out and manage my time in a way that I was both paying my bills and also taking care of my mental health in a way that was at least somewhat functional.
Right. Okay. I have one somewhat final question. I mean, I have my regular final question, but this is my last not final question. Do you ever, and I feel like this is the big buzzword right now, I think, isn't the messy SLP doing her dissertation on it or something like that? Imposter syndrome. Have you ever, because I think it's a very brave thing to be like, this is my curriculum that I created, and promoting that. How did you ever deal with imposter syndrome? And if you did, how did you basically be like, shush it, I'm trying to do the dang thing, so goodbye?
Yeah, I think for me, journaling helps a lot, taking, and this of course is something that we teach a lot about in my program. And so much of it is what I have done for myself, and also what, all of the, like, I pull my resources from the people in my community, whether that is my family, my friends, my colleagues, other incredible, professionals and entrepreneurs that I know or respect and love. And I think for me, it's about, thinking about when have I already proven to myself that I can do this, and looking for the evidence, right? Looking for the evidence of what do I see around me that shows me that I can do this, that I can move forward, that I can take the small next step forward. And that is like the key, I think, too, is because when you look at, like, I want to build this big, scary dream, yeah, that's going to be freaking scary. Like, how do you piece that apart? But if you can take it apart and make those big goals into smaller tasks and figure out, okay, well, what do I need to do to get this quarter, to this part of it, right? What do I need to do to just get to this stage? What are the, like, 6 things that I can do this year, or start to do this quarter, or do every week, that are going to move the needle and help me feel better about that? And breaking it down. And also, I think, breaking away from perfectionism and away from the idea that, like, you have to be the expert, you have to be all knowledgeable, and you have to have, you have to have this kind of knowledge in order to be the perfect person to serve everybody. Like, no, you're not going to be the perfect person to serve everybody, number one. And understanding that, like, that sense of perfectionism, that's a construct. That's not you. That's not necessary. None of us is perfect. None of us is getting it right all the time. And the more that you can name that and acknowledge that, the better off we all are. Because, I mean, I think part of it is, like, parenthood has certainly helped me with that, because, like, I want to be the best mom that I can be every single day of my life, every moment of my life. Am I going to be? No. I'm going to yell at my kids. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to have my 7-year-old literally tell me the other day, I learned it from you. I'm like, oh my God.
Like, scene.
Like, shoot. I'm gonna reproduce all of the horrible habits that were modeled to me, that are like little t traumas that are intergenerational. I'm gonna do all those things because I'm human. And if I can say that out loud and acknowledge that and recognize that that's not going to stop me from doing the things in my life and in this day and in this hour that I need to get done, so that I can move forward and hope that those big, scary dreams and goals that I have for myself can move towards fruition. I mean, if you asked me 5 years ago if I would be on this podcast, I would have laughed in your face probably. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That would be so cool. I don't know how to do that. Right?
Yeah, like,
because I didn't.
People, like, who does that?
Right. But I Googled it. So
yes. Well, and I love that. And I wrote that down for the show notes because I really like that. How, like, being imperfect doesn't have to stop. Well, first of all, none of us are perfect, but sometimes, like, having to, like, really, like, sit and marinate in the fact that we're not perfect, like, really just gives some of us some hurt feels. But also going beyond that and recognizing that being imperfect doesn't have to stop you from, go and do the dang thing. Like, being imperfect doesn't have to stop you from doing whatever the heck it is that you want to do. Like, maybe you want to start a private practice. Maybe, like I said, maybe you want to sell mugs on Etsy. Like, do you, boo.
Do it.
Whatever brings you joy. But being imperfect doesn't have to keep you from doing that. And I feel like, I'm really glad that you said that, because I feel like we have this false idea in the back of our head that it will keep us from doing what we want and achieving what we want.
Right. Well, and like you were talking about earlier, is that like that thing that stops so many people from starting a private practice is like the name and the logo and the perfect website. Like, do you have any idea how many ugly websites I have created? Like, come on. I didn't know how to build a website. Who cares?
Yes. Well, and I think sometimes it's those things, we get so caught up in them because they're so visual, but I think people forget about about this idea, especially we were talking about you, like a brand earlier, like building a brand, like you were the secret sauce. Like, yes, your website, like if you want to have a nice website, like that's great. Like all that stuff is good. Like, yeah, like having like a cute logo is great. But like when whatever you're trying to do, if you're trying to, like I said, make an Etsy store or start a private practice or, creating materials for the SLP, like SLPs, like people care about, like people want to hear, they're not buying, a lot of times they're not buying your product, they're buying from your brand.
Yes.
You are not the only person out there, Ayelet, that's teaching early childhood peeps how to help parents teach their kids, but nobody's doing it the way that you're doing it. And that's what makes you stand out from other people. Like same thing, like there's a million people selling freaking TPT stuff on the TPT store. Well, nobody's selling your stuff on the TPT. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. But, and what is that? I mean, there is a quote, what is it? Like people don't buy, what is it about people don't buy from brand, people don't, oh my God, now I'm totally.
Is it, they don't buy from logos, they buy from people.
They don't, right. Like something about like people don't buy from the brand or the company, they buy from people. Yeah. And like, that's it. Like you, if you can infuse what you and your brand stand for with your values, that is huge. That is everything. Yeah. And it's all about building trust and creating systems that are responsive to the people and the experience that you want people to have with your brand and with you. Cause again, it comes down to like, you can have a beautiful logo, but how are you going to pay for that logo if you're not selling your coffee mugs or whatever it is,
or baseball hats.
Who cares?
Or scarves or nose plugs. I don't know what's in these days. Yes. And I mean, branding, like that's a conversation we'll have to have you on talk about too. But I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time. So Ayelet, tell us, before I let you go, tell us like one final piece, like what would you like to, if anyone listening, if you remember one thing from this conversation today, what is the one thing that you want them to remember?
I think, honestly, there's a big piece. I think we've touched on this a lot, but just to say it out loud, like you are the best you that there is, like to serve your audience and to serve what you want to do. There's so many content creators out there. It is really hard not to have that imposter syndrome, right? But you have to remember that no one has that same voice as you. Nobody has the same perspective as you. No one has the same lived experience as you. You are going to be the best person for other people out there. And when we're learning something new, again, like we do need to hear that same information shared through different lenses. And your lens is totally valid and valued by the person who needs to hear it in the way that you're presenting it. So,
yes. And I think as long as you are brave enough and have this is mostly women listening to the show. So as long as you're brave enough and have the lady nads to actually like put yourself out there and be you, like, I think that's part of that. Authenticity is really important in whatever it is that you're doing. I mean, I think especially nowadays, people can smell fake, like PU a mile away. So if you are brave enough and have the courage enough to put yourself out there and just be you, and no matter what it is, I feel like as long as you're just being authentic, I think that goes a really, really, really long way as well. I love that. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. This was so many good goodies. I was like typing away from my show notes as we were talking. This was fabulous. But thank you so much, Ayelet. And I appreciate you coming on. And everybody go follow her on Instagram. It's @learnwithless, right? And then all of her website and all that information is down in the show notes in the description. Also her books, and definitely go check out her program. I'm kind of like, I need to save up for it. I love it. See, I'm doing too many projects. I gotta call myself, but now I want to go.
We'll be here. We'll be here.
I love it.
Be waiting for you, Danny.
Yes. Yeah, love it. All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to hear more no fluff, getting the dang thing done stuff from myself and other real life SLPs, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or pledge a small amount on patreon.com/SpeechGoods. If you found this content valuable, please share it with others so we can get this message out there. And if you haven't already, join us on Instagram. Handle is @SpeechGoods. See you there.